So back to the story. So 1st and 2nd Kings written from the perspective of the north, and especially a demonstration of God's undeserved mercy. 1st, 2nd Chronicles, you have to understand what this was like. So these people, while deported into Babylon, they're not in jail, and they're able to have their own lives. But the thing that was so disheartening is they're separate from each other. The idea of the Babylonians isn't to kill them or enslave them, but to absorb them into their own culture, and then the nation would just disappear. But God, in His mercy, had promised that this deportation, this captivity, if you use that word, living in Babylon, this exile, would last 70 years. And I don't think we talked about it in great detail, but you can count 70 in two different ways. You can count 70 from the first deportation to the first return of Jewish people to the Holy Land. Or you could count it from the destruction of the temple to the dedication of the new rebuilt temple. Either way, it's 70 years. It's 605 to 536, or it's 586 to 516. Either way, it's still 70 years. So Jeremiah was right, 70 years in exile. But when they get back, and that's where you get to read about this coming Wednesday, so the little preview here. When they get back, they are looking at wasteland of their homes are gone, the temple is ruined, it's rubble, the city is rubble, and there are native peoples from Canaan who intermarried with stragglers who were left behind, forming a mixed race, living in the center of the land, which we often know as Samaria, and now it's the Samaritans. And so you have others who they have to kind of push out and worry about. So there's not as many as left are coming back. How many numbers, it's hard to tell. Several million deported, several thousand back, 100,000, we don't know. But when they come back, now they have to go about rebuilding the temple. That's their priority, and they didn't do it. They start building their house first. And God sends them prophets, get your act together, build the temple, so they get the temple built. But even when that's done, this is just disappointing. And you got the people who are older, who remembered the Solomon temple, and they're looking at the new one, and they're crying. It's like Grace Church burns down, and we build a Quonset hut. It's just, we can worship our God in a Quonset hut. We can do it outside, but it's not the same. It's just not. And to have all the neighboring peoples give them flack, to have their economic system disrupted, to have no king. Prior to the exile, you still had kings all the way down to the Babylonian guys, grab the last one, take him up north, kill his sons, and poke his eyes out. And then there's no more kings after that. Even the governing rulers who led them back from Babylon, eventually that guy dies, and then there's no succession in the line of King David. There's no king. Isaiah describes the family tree of David, the king tree, as a dead stone. So if you're living as a Jewish person coming back from Babylon, you're looking at all this ruin, you're looking at the temple, it's just like second or third class, right? And you don't have a king, you aren't in charge of, like your own ruling, you're under the thumb of the Persians, the Babylonians and the Persians, it's just really, and we're supposed to be the people of promise. Is it ever going to happen? Probably can't. It probably can't happen. God said we would be able to come back from exile. But looking around, really, how can this possibly? So that's the environment, and those are the people to which Ezra, who we think is the author, writes the Chronicles. And he starts off with what I would always view, and maybe you do too. I start off First Chronicles, and I'm looking at this, and it's these lists, right? And how exciting is that? I mean, who in all the world says, I think for a little excitement today, I'm going to pick up and read the phone book. I mean, that's kind of what that is. What excitement do you find in reading the phone book? Who would do that, right? But you have to look at what the author is doing. he is writing to people who think our nation now is either worthless or disconnected from our past history, and our future is terrible and probably going to not be worth anything. He starts and he connects them right back to the very beginning, from Adam all the way down, and then traces the specifics of their nation. And when these people got Ezra's book Chronicles back in that era, that would be, their emotions would be like somebody standing at the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. I have not had that privilege yet. Some of you have. I bet in D.C. and this black wall, right? And you think a list of names, what's that? Well, talk to somebody whose dad or grandpa, his name is on that list, and they can go up and they can touch and see their name on that black wall. Do you think that elicits some emotion? I think so. I think so. And that's what that's like, when these people would get this book from God through Ezra and they start reading, and tears come to their eyes. This is real. This is God still loving us. You just have to think, wow, it's an amazing. So what we think is dry, boring name after name after name has a purpose. And God put that in the Bible for a reason. And so then through the rest of Chronicles, when you get the David story, and you get the King Solomon story, then the divided kingdom, and then the remaining only southern Judah, that whole story is there. It's looking at it with the storyline of Judah to say, yeah, some of these guys messed up, but they still are in the line of David. It is still, so the themes that the chronicler wants to hand off to us are, this still is the nation of promise. It really is. The Savior will come from you. And they're reading this. Really. And King David is the line from which the Savior actually will be born. It's been cut off, dead stump, but there still are going to be descendants, and he will come. The Messiah is real. He's coming. And thirdly, if you're going to be connected to God by faith, one thing that you just think of from word go, from the Garden of Eden all the way until Judgment Days, how can I honor and praise and thank you enough, dear Lord? I want to be able to gather with my fellow believers who know this to be true and to worship you. So the temple and the temple worship becomes another theme in these two books that is just always popping up in central. The priests, the Levites, the temple. So that's why these two books are so important in the Bible, different from 1st and 2nd Kings. There we have the message of God's dealing with sinners and then dealing with them in grace. Here we have the same thing, but a new view to build up the moral fiber and the spiritual fiber and the hope of people who are downhearted and discouraged with those major themes. And that's what makes 1st and 2nd Chronicles so much fun. You'll get details about Manasseh and his repentance that you wouldn't have had before. You get details about King Asa, the third king in Judah, that you didn't have before. It's a neat perspective from that view. So that's a little my opening sermon here for you to think about. Paul.
And just a question on the name. You used the name Judah.
Yeah.
And there's also Judea.
Yes.
Are they one and the same, or are
yes.
they different?
Yes. And so that's really a good one, and thank you. So it starts with the name Judah, which obvious English, Judah, right? Because that's the name of the tribe descended from one of the boys of Jacob, one of the Israelite boys, the tribe of Judah. When Solomon did his sinful behavior, and God says the kingdom is going to be rent in two, well, there's going to be 10 tribes, and then he talks about one. Well, it's a little bit, Judah is going to be that one, but there's another one that gets merged in. Is it part of Simeon? Is it Benjamin? Or what? So it's like 10 and 2. It seems as though it's Benjamin, which is on the border of Judah. But anyway, Judah becomes the dominant tribe down south, and it becomes the name of the southern kingdom, Judah. When they are, and the north is gone now, when the southern kingdom, Judah, is deported to Babylon, the short version of describing them is to shorten these people are Judahites. Well, it gets shortened into Jews. So that's one piece of the story. That's where that term comes from. These are people from the tribe of Judah, the land, the nation of Judah, Jews, right? But then when you come back and they replant, it is the southern kingdom, Judah, and they can even call themselves now Israel, because that's all that's left. But later on, as you go through the history, they come back, let's say, in the 400s BC. The first wave is like early 500, but then another 80 years. Then we're kind of done with that. And the Old Testament ends around 440, 430 with Malachi. Then you have them under the Persians, under the Greeks, and under the Romans. And the territorial name of Judah is then adapted into the Greek and Roman languages. So that's where you get Judea, because that's more Roman speak or Greek speak for Judah. It's the same name, but in a different language. So in Jesus' day, when we did I suppose I'm going to grab one that's all dried up. But in Jesus' day, when you always got to do the little balloon with a tail, and then that sort of banana, and then this guy. So when we go like this, we're talking about Judea and Samaria and Galilee. And these are adaptations from Roman Empire control. And those are the divisions. But Judah, the tribe, and then the southern kingdom called Judah, is down south, and that's adapted into the Greek and Latin, into the Roman language, into Judea. But it is the same. It is the same. Same like the city of Samaria up in here, the city, you read in 1st and 2nd Kings, is the capital of the north, just like Jerusalem is the capital of the south. So Jerusalem is here and Samaria is there. That city gives its name to the territory when they come back from exile and there's people living there. And that's stuck all the way through into Jesus' day. And of course, the northern territory, Galilee, gets its name from the lake, which has several names. Gennesaret, Tiberias, Sea of Galilee. So that's how that happened in Jesus' day. But they have to get, 4 centuries down the road to that. That's good. And in your New Testament times, by the way, they called the land on this side Perea. And notice the ending. See, that's the Judea, Perea. And that's, I'm not sure, I can't say for certain, my handwriting is really bad, if that had anything to do with Judea, I'm not sure. But this is Latin words, this is rooted in to go, and this is through. You go through the Jordan River to get there. Transjordan area is called Perea. You go through to get there, Perea. And is that connected to Judea? I don't know. And I don't know if linguistics enough to talk about that one. Do you have things you'd like to talk about, ask about 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and Chronicles? The floor is open. So, Joe.
It's not really a question, but
Sure.
I thought it was interesting that a lot of times when the many different kings, it always says their mom.
It says your mother.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because this is not a matriarchal society.
Right. And again, what would be the explanation for that, do you think?
I'm going to guess the kings had many wives.
Yes, that is it. The kings had many wives, and so then many times they'll say, this is the son of such and such king. They name the mom so they know which branch it came from because of the multiple wives. I bet that's it.
Sounds good.
Sort them out, yeah. Other thoughts?
So there's
I
a
have
lot
some
of
questions for you otherwise.
there's a lot of references about the acts of this king are documented in the Chronicles
Yeah.
of the Kings.
Yeah.
Now, clearly that's not the First and Second Chronicles.
Right, right.
I did see a reference someplace to Chronicles of Samuel the seer, Nathan the prophet, and Gad, who was, I guess, not no one, because he didn't get the. So are that, so
Yeah.
is there another set of,
It-
and do we have those?
No,
We don't.
we
Okay.
don't, as far as I know, we do not have that. But you are right in surmising that there must have been written annals that recorded historic information that God did not see fit to put in the Bible. And could there also be some of those written annals that later on Bible writers like Ezra could have referred to and incorporated into his account? Sure. What we know, and you and I trust, is that whatever God wanted to have in the Holy Scriptures, that he put in there. But there could very easily, and because the references are there, been other material that God says, this is, I don't need to have that in my book. But it's important historical information and was recorded. Yeah. It's kind of interesting. It's a literate society, you know.
Is there any commentary on how you can go from one good king to one just wretched king in a generation?
How do you go from one to the next? That is.
Obviously, there's some mother influence. And,
Yeah.
your bad friends advising you stupidly, but
You saw that a couple times.
Yeah.
Elijah gets his buddies around him.
yeah.
Yeah. Kathy, I don't know the answer to that one other
Scary
than
thought,
it sounds like today. It sounds like, right? I mean, those of us who are parents, one of our big deals is to pray that God would keep our children close to Jesus, right? And you and I all know that isn't always the case. As much as we long for that and desire that. And it's hurtful in our own hearts when we experience that, you know, and or see it with a friend that we care about. The next generation isn't as faithful, and then maybe the third generation is. You know, it's hard to determine how could that happen. You know, how can you go from Ahaz, who was as horrible in the south as Ahab was in the north? How can you go from Ahaz to Hezekiah? You have some other unique ones where when you start off with, let me just think what's in the south, so it's Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, then Ahaziah, and he is the son of Jehoram, who had married into Ahab's family. And when he's dead, then his mother, Athaliah, who's horrible, is like the queen. I list her in my king list because it gives me 20, it's a round number. But then his brother, there's another kid in there who gets preserved and hidden by the priest, Joash. So there would be one example, I think, Kathy, where you get godly spiritual leaders guarding that future king, that little boy, away from the wicked queen Athaliah. But that isn't always the case. And how do you explain one generation to the next? And the changes. In the north, you can see it because there's a lot of times a different dynasty. There's assassination. You know, there's not one bloodline. In the south, it's one bloodline. And it is a bit of a head scratcher. How could Josiah, as faithful as he was, have sons, grandsons, and stuff who were kind of schnooks? Well, we live in this real sinful world, right? That was an interesting question.
Going along with the rapid switching, one thing that kind of, I don't want to say entertained me, but it sort of did, with the rapid switching back and forth. I mean, rapid from generation to generation, but just like like, okay, we're all gonna do this now, says the king, and everybody says, okie dokie.
Yeah, we're all gonna worship Baals now, and then, okay.
Yeah, well, we're not doing that anymore, all right.
Yeah.
I'm just like, cause I mean, there's nothing about ordinary people,
Yeah.
but just thinking about it, like, everybody just went along with it, huh?
Well, what do you think actually might have really happened? Let's say you have a terrible king situation where after Hezekiah you got Manasseh and Ammon, and they're pretty awful. And then all of a sudden Josiah comes in with Reformation. Well, the Bible does indicate that Josiah did a great job cleaning up, and you're kind of thinking to myself, and I'm reading like you are, well, everybody's sort of going along with Josiah. We're going to clean up our act. But there was enough evil yet that God said, Josiah, you know what I'm going to do? You're faithful, and I'm going to actually take you to heaven so you don't see the destruction, because the destruction is still going to come. So there was an undercurrent yet, even though Josiah brings this wonderful reformation and reads the scriptures, and you see people hopefully getting there. There's still probably hundreds, thousands, many who were not on board, and probably also the reverse. You know, where you have people who are faithful to the Lord God, and then the next generation king comes in and he goes back to this idol worship stuff. Did everybody jump in on that? I would imagine not. Don't you think there had to be still some faithful? That's what I'm thinking. Just like we have in our world today, right? It's not everybody in America is a rank unbeliever, agnostic, atheist, whatever. But they're not all Christians either. But when you have that kind of sway as a leader, you're going to have some influence. And that's the sad thing to see. They were not the shepherds that God intended when he started with King David anyway. You have more. Judy.
I'm going to talk about Asher poles.
Asherah?
Asherah.
Yeah.
Looked up images of it, and it actually, there was a different image, but one image reminded me of the Washington Monument.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Most of those had to do with phallic symbols, to be honest with you. It's pretty gross. But that would be glorifying the male sex organ. Because the Asherah is the goddess connected to Baal, the male god, and those were fertility cult sex religions. So to make Baal and his idol god consort Asherah happy, you want to worship them, and you worship them because he is the god of thunder, Baal, and when it's thundering and lightning, you can expect there will also be rain, right. And in a semi-arid country, you absolutely have to have rain for the ground to be fertile enough to produce crops, and for the olive trees and the figs to grow. You have to have, you got sunshine, but you have to have the rain. So how do you get the Baal thunder god to make it rain? Well, he is the god with his rain who makes the ground fertile, and it produces. Get that connection?
Okay.
So the worshiping of him to make him happy is to get involved in fertility. So that's why they had male and female prostitutes at the Baal shrines. And the idea was you can go and have sex with whatever you want, but that would be pleasing to Baal. He'll be happy and he'll make it rain. As you do the fertility act, then the fertile thunder god makes the ground fertile. You see?
Okay.
And so his consort, the female, is Asherah. Asherah poles were male sex or phallic symbols. Sometimes carved in a figure of a woman's body on this, but that's how gross that was. They worshipped like that. See, then once you know, and I almost, you hate to even talk, but you're all adults and we can talk about this. This is serious. But once you understand how horrible this was in the land of Canaan, and then Ahab and his wife Jezebel introduce it into the northern kingdom. in place of the worship of the true God. This is not just nations around. Now they're doing it as the official religion. And when you see that, then it gives you a little clearer picture when they started entering the land with Joshua, and God said, kill them all. You get a little clearer picture of that. Because, I mean, you just think about how human brains and human psychology and human growth and development work, and then how the sinful human nature impacts, right? If you have soldiers ages 20 to 50, right? And these are the men who are to be fighting, right? What is a 20, 30-year-old man going to be tempted with a lot? Well, sex, right? I mean, that is the part of a sinful world we live in. And are women tempted to? Well, of course. But I mean, this is a male, you understand, I'm just describing what is reality, right? And maybe later on in life or earlier, it might be money. That's what but at the young age, the sex drive is, so now, if you don't wipe all these people out and you allow them to live and you just, okay, I'm done fighting and we set up our homes and we're going to go about our lives, that becomes tempting. It's basically like saying, we are going to start a church and build our homes in the red light district of Amsterdam or Las Vegas. And this is where we want to be at. We want to have worship, and we want to have our lives and let our kids play, and our young boys or teenagers grow up on the strip in Vegas. And we are going to train them to sleep in until 6, go to dinner, and party until 6 a.m. at strip clubs. That's how we want that's our worship. And that will be good. And it makes your stomach turn. It's just gross. And sinful to the degree that you just can't imagine. And God said, that's why, wipe them out. Wipe them out. Otherwise, you're going to get pulled away from me. Guess what? They didn't wipe them all out, and guess what happened? So the fertility cult worship of the natives did impact Israel and was their downfall.
So where did that start? Like somebody just made it up?
Yeah. But where does it start? It starts in the heart of a human who, like Adam and Eve, rebelled against God and said, I'm turned into myself, and I take care of myself and my needs and my ambitions and feelings first. Joe.
So, going off of this, so I looked up stuff about religion in this area because that's what you do. Because I googled the word Baal and then went from there. But one thing that I found that I thought was kind of interesting in connection with God said wipe them all out, is that from a non-Christian religious perspective, but from just outside scholarly sort of stuff, there's not a lot of information that still exists about specifics about their religious practices.
Right.
I thought that's kind of interesting because, they sometimes wiped it out.
Yeah.
And I just think it's kind of neat to see that there's not a lot of specific knowledge that people have right now.
There's not a lot, right? But
Not a lot.
there is enough that we have. I mean, even outside of Scripture, archaeological evidence. I've not been on digs, in the Middle East or anything, but you could read archaeological books and they'll uncover some of the stuff related to the fertility cult worship.
They find a lot of the physical stuff, but there's no writing about much at all that didn't survive. And I thought that was kind of interesting in light of this repeated wipe them all out.
Yeah.
I thought that was very interesting to find out.
And it relates back, the question of how does it get there? Well, after the flood, you have Shem, Ham, and Japheth, right? And Ham is the one who laughed about the fact that his dad, Noah, was uncovered, drunk, right? So there's sexually explicit overtones in the behavior of sinful Noah. And then Ham laughing about this is funny. You see, a naked dad. Shem and Japheth go in backwards with and cover him. But then Noah, sobering up, says not to Ham, but to his son, cursed be Canaan, which, when you tie it together, Canaanites occupy the promised land. And what's their hang-up? The curse from Noah is the hang-up with sex. And the Canaanites demonstrated that in their history. They were hung up on that. Now, more so than any other nation or tribe, I don't know, but it seems from the fertility cults that they ran into later on, centuries later, that there is a connection.
Baal worship doesn't sound like you're gonna have like chapters and books to study up on and read them. It's just,
Yeah.
it's a pretty kind of simple thing you do to
Right.
worship.
Yeah, and you know, human beings, we all are human beings, right? We all are born sinners. We have our sinful nature and our weakness, and it can show up in different ways at different ages and for different people. But the drive for sustenance, right, and status and sex is pretty normal in every human being. Right? I mean, we need our Lord Jesus to come and be honest with us and say that's sinful when it goes to excess or is outside of marriage, for example, in the sex thing. Or you're using work and your status and giving sustenance in a sinful way to please only self and not be it can always be carried. There's godly ways in which God wants that to be controlled, but when it's outside of His bounds and His will, you get in trouble. And that's true for all ages. And we need the Lord God to show that as sinful, and then Jesus to forgive us, so we're empowered to live in the way God wants. Status comes from what God says. You're a child. You're in my family. I love you. Your sustenance is feeding your soul. Yeah, go ahead and work and put bread on the table. But that's not your be-all. Be-all and all is my words for your soul. And the sex drive is to be designed by God to be within the marriage bond. That's where God wants it. And then it's a blessing and a joy. God's design works. It just came up not too long ago. And it was not too long ago when we were doing a pre-marriage thing. But when you think about that, I'm probably getting a little far afield here. But from the sinful natures of these drives that all humans have, it is interesting and fascinating when you do it God's way. I think you're all aware of this, that if a man and a woman are sexually abstinent and then marry and only have sex with each other, it is impossible biologically to get an STD. That's how God designed it. To me, that's just fascinating. And I found out, I just happened to be chatting with my internist, my doctor, because I had my annual, I have to do that at this age, you have to go in every year, right? And she's a Christian, I know that, we were talking about stuff. And she said, it's also, she said, and I don't know, that she's a doctor, she told me, but also cervical cancer fits in that same realm. That women won't, if they are sexually abstinent and only have sex with their husband in marriage and only him, they won't and can't get cervical cancer. I didn't know that. And I thought, but she's a doc, I take her word for it. It's like when Paul talks, I always take his word for it. He's a doc,
We gotta assume husbands do the same thing.
That the two of them, correct. That the both of them, right. Which is just fascinating. So, how God designs it, But anyway, get far afield here when my notebook falls apart. So, I had some things in 1st and 2nd Kings. If you didn't, I don't know if any of these are fascinating to you. We could just take a quick look. Just by way of historic reference, I think on my questions on page 65, the immediate cause of the secession of North was Solomon's sinfulness there. So the underlying cause is allowing idolatry. Let's see, what do you think about the mixed worship? Oh, that number 2 question about the difference between mixed worship and complete idolatry. Which do you think is worse? That's something I don't know if you've ever had a chance to think about. Which do you think is worse? Mixed worship, where you take the concepts of worshiping the true God and combine it with some idolatry, like the calf worship they had. Or complete idolatry. No true God at all involved. Which is worse?
I thought it's mixed, personally,
Explain that.
because they should know better.
What do you mean by?
Well, if they read the,
You say mixed worship is worse than complete because they should know better.
yeah,
Yeah. Anybody else?
I was really on the fence, because certainly, you know, on the quote positive side, mixed worship, there's still the chance to hear the true word of God.
Yep.
Right, because you're still at least having some aspects of that.
Yeah.
Or with idolatry, obviously, there's
And
nothing.
they're outside the family of faith completely.
On the other hand, mixed worship, I think, can give you this sense of confidence that you're okay with God. This false sense of confidence because, well, yeah, I'm following,
Yeah.
you know, if you're an Israelite, I'm following the traditions, you know, I you know, throughout life known a lot of, you know, sort of nominal Jewish. who
Sure.
Go to the temple, you know, the same as Christians that come to church Christmas and Easter.
Yeah.
They, you know, they go to the temple for Passover. They, you know, a couple big, you know, and I think you can get this sort of false sense of
Yeah.
thinking you're okay with God because you're showing up at church every now and then.
The next
So I'm
piece-
not sure which is most dangerous. I think they're
Right.
obviously both
Right.
dangerous.
They're,
and
they're
damning.
both dangerous, but you know, then the other additional part that I was thinking about asking was, which do you think is easier to deal with? You know, I have found that maybe they're nominal, they have completely fallen away. They don't say that they're godless or agnostic. You know, they've fallen away. Sometimes easier to deal with when someone who says, yes, I'm a Christian, but they mix in error, and to sort that out. In other words, this is just my experience over the last 40 years, is like, if I'm dealing with someone, again, this is going to be like a stream on tape, and I got to make sure and be careful what to say, but if I'm dealing with someone who's, let's just, as an example, a fallen away Catholic, all right? And they have a chance to hear that, yeah, their guilt that they always have felt, and they just kind of push it aside, they're nominal Catholic, but their reason for that is because they're desperately in need of a savior. They've got one, and it's free. And they go, whoa, really? Free? I don't have to do it? That it's like a clean, whoa, my eyes are opened. But if I'm dealing with someone who comes from a non-denominational or Baptist background, we're going to talk about the sacraments like baptism, and they already know the Bible's true and Jesus is Savior, and you know but they're not clear on the means of grace. That's, to me, I found more difficult conversation and more pulling threads apart and trying to get them to see. It's just trickier because they have so many elements of the truth, but they're missing out on understanding of the full nature of original sin, the full nature of the meaning of faith, the full nature of the means of grace, and baptism and so on. It's just sort of interesting to me. That's why I kind of put that in there. So, dealing with it, you know, it's sometimes harder when you're dealing with a mix, you know, because they have that sort of self-satisfied, I'm okay, right? You know that.
Yeah, it's almost easier to deal with an atheist than it is.
Almost.
In
Yeah.
some respects, because it's just
Yeah.
clear, you know it, and
Yeah. Although, you know, that's a whole other thing about in our world today, agnostics, atheists, and how we, in love, can listen to their story and find out and engage in conversation. I had a couple other ones here. The preachers on number 5, maybe you knew this, but in the divided kingdom, the famous ones we read about in 1st, 2nd Kings are Elijah and Elisha. And we are going to, in a few short weeks, this will probably come up as we get closer to into the 2019, then we start looking at these prophets, and the earliest, Obadiah, Joel, Jonah, Amos, Hosea. But then when their north is gone, then in the south you have Isaiah, Micah, although I have to maybe redo this PowerPoint slide because Isaiah and Micah do drip over a little bit talking to the whole nation. But Nahum and the rest, they're all only in the south. And our Bibles are kind of organized that way when you have the big prophets and the smaller ones. We'll look at that later. I think I covered some other things here. Why did Judah last longer? That was a number 6 on page 66. You probably know the answer to that. Why would the South last longer? The North has gone in 722, the South in 586, another 150 years. Is it too obvious to ask?
Well, the Savior has to come from a
The
line that's
Savior
not
has to
been
come from
destroyed.
them, yeah? Changing.
That's what I was gonna say, they have the promise of the Savior.
Yeah,
They're somewhat more faithful.
it's at least the bloodline there, and they seem to have hung in and warded off the idolatry a little bit longer than the north. The north fell into it right away. And an overview of the struggle of world powers outside of Israel and Judah. I don't know if I had that up here. So, world powers. This comes up so that you can see this. And I think I also have it in my coming slides, but just a quick overview. So Assyria is the shaded darker green, but then they eventually push down into what we call Iraq, and then down this way. And Babylon takes that same kind of fertile crescent look, and eventually Persia, coming from what we now would call Iran, takes over a wider territory. And in history, 400s BC and so on, there's big battles going on with Greece, with Persia. And this is all impacting biblical history and the people of God who are living there. So I'm going to be ready to take a break, and then we'll introduce our. Let's do that. Let's take our snack break. I think Judy is our kind hostess. Thank you, Judy. Let's talk about the next books we're going to be looking at. Alex, do you want to borrow some of the sheets from a different one and then just put them into yours? Or you
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah. I quickly ran in my office and grabbed my miniature Old Testament that I have hanging out here. My bigger one is at home. But the three divisions of the Old Testament scriptures have the Pentateuch, the Torah, the first 5 books, the Torah. And then they have the Nevi'im, the prophets, the preaching books. And that's a lot of the ones we studied, except the Chronicles. They fit in this third category, the writings. And in the Hebrew Bible's arrangement, the writings always starts off with the big one, the powerful one, which would be the Psalms. And the list are Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Song of Songs, Ruth, and then Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. Those are the writings, and they're on a separate third chunk in the Old Testament Bible. We have some of those books interspersed in English in a little different sequence, and we call them history books. So a lot of times we would look at Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther as being that, history. But the Hebrews viewed them as the writings fitting in better with the others. They're written later, like Chronicles. It's not afterthoughts. It's important stuff that God wanted, but they organized them in a different way. So let's talk about these three, and then if we have some time, we can always come back to think about 1st, 2nd Chronicles and other unique accounts. So our usual approach is to do the scorecard, and the author for Ezra is Ezra. And many of us have the strong opinion that he also authored 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Maybe not, but it could fit. When did he write? 430 BC. These are round numbers. So you can see that we're quite a bit later in history. When we cut off at 2nd Kings, when we cut off at 2nd Chronicles, we're about 587, 86. So you go to 150 years later. This is after the 70 years in Babylon and a return. Then you have the stories of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther that unfold, but the writing Ezra fits in here. I'll show you a timeline too. Very likely Judah, because that's all you have. That's all there's left of the land, is the southern part. Okay? And I'm going to do Nehemiah also, which might make a page turn for you. No, it's on the same page, that's right. I put them together on purpose because the way I view Ezra and Nehemiah, it's one story altogether. They intersect. And you'll see that when you read this, because I have one outline for the 2 books. So the author of Nehemiah, I believe, is Nehemiah, who was not a prophet or a priest or a king. He's an administrator in the Persian government. Jewish. Probably from the Department of the Interior, or something like that. Again, around 430 BC, my round number. And where, either in Judah, where he visited, or back where he was headquartered in the capital in the land of Persia. So, ready? Some key factors about these books. The 20 years of Babylonian domination and deporting I just mentioned earlier in our class tonight span 605 to 586. The ending of it all ends in the destruction of Jerusalem. You have the 70-year captivity, I mentioned that also, and then you can count that either, as I said, now I have it in PowerPoint, from 605 to 536 or 586 to 516. The first deportation is the first return, or the destruction of the temple to the rededication of the new temple. It might be helpful if you use your notebook and go back to page, I think it's 50, where is that? 57, thanks, Jeff. I have those charts. Yep. Is that where it is? Yep, there it is. So the charts of the kings of Judah and Israel, when you get to 57, thanks, Jeff, you have the spiny ridge in the middle that gives you dates, and then I penciled in or inked in the squiggly lines for the 70 years, and that gives you two brackets that give us a choice. And either way, it's 70, which I think is pretty cool. Sort of a God thing. It's going to be 70 no matter what. Count any way you want. So here's my arrow. Babylon conquers the south, like that. So every 500 years, remember how we do this timeline? Abraham and the boys are out there, and Moses is 15. David is 1,000. The captivity is getting pretty close to 500 in the return. It's already in there. Jesus is at 0. It's always good to have that little chunk of stuff in your head and it just kind of it all fits together. Okay? So the outline, now we're back to where we were, which is page 60. The outline, and I have it up here on the screen too, comes in 4 parts. And the way I have it arranged is, at least in my mind and on the outline here, the first return of Jewish people from Babylon back to Judah, they didn't all come in one shot, was at 536. The second return is at 458. The third return is in 444. And then the story then of Ezra and Nehemiah continues with some reforms in the outline, part 4. So how do you remember this? Not that there's going to be a quiz, but how do you remember? How are we going to remember these returns? Well, here's what I do. The book of Ezra gives us the first return and the second. The book of Nehemiah gives us the third return and those reforms. And Nehemiah and Ezra are both involved because the Jewish people needed to get their act together and they were doing some naughty stuff yet. And they had to get that figured out. You'll read about it. You can read Ezra. This is a pretty easy week, it's 13 minutes. So you can read it more than once. And there's some listing of names too, it makes it even faster. Nehemiah doesn't take long to read. And the storyline. So here's how that works. So the north and the south, this you don't have, I don't think you have this here. This is my PowerPoint storyline. I have something like it, I guess, on the bottom of page 7. Something like that on page 70, but I'll do it up here anyway. So when Solomon dies, we have the civil war split north and south. Then you have the Assyrians wiping out the north, 722. You have those 2 brackets for the captivity or the exile in Babylon. And then you have these returns. So the first one, under a dude named Zerubbabel. Gotta love that name. I'm still waiting to baptize a kid who's going to be Zerubbabel. Either that or Isaiah's son, Maher Shalal Hashbaz. I think that's it. I baptize you in the name. And I just kind of think of it. Who would think of it? Zerubbabel, first return. So I associate that with the letter Z. The second return is way out in 458 under Ezra. And I associate that with the letter E. And the third return is under Nehemiah 444. And so I associate that with the letter N. The three returns, Zen. Got nothing to do with Buddhism. Nothing to do with meditation. It's Zen, it's Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. 536, 458, 444. How many were deported and how many returned? Again, it's really hard to, some people have thought 1 million or 2 million deported, 50,000 returned. I don't know. I think that's kind of stretching it in guesswork. But at least gives you a picture of what you're going to be reading and how this works. Okay? So here's the end of 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. We have the burning of Jerusalem there. On the PowerPoint, I have these pictures. And the people are leaving. And then in Ezra, you have a decree from the Persian king. The Persians conquered Babylon and said, we're going to let Jewish people go back if they want. That was the decree from the king of Persia, Cyrus. So now you have a return in Ezra chapter 2. Chapters 3 and 6 to 6, they're rebuilding the temple. In chapters 4 to 6, there's opposition to the building of the temple. Then finally they rededicate the temple. And then Ezra is given permission in chapter 6. Now, that was Zerubbabel was the first one. Now, the second return, he's given permission. Now, you could go back. This is several decades later. So he leads people to confess their sin because they're not behaving in godly ways. Nehemiah gets permission to go to Jerusalem because he found out that the temple has been rebuilt, but the city walls are in shambles. And if you do not have a great fortification around your city, you're susceptible to attack. And so Nehemiah, a Jewish man in the Persian king's administrative cabinet, says, I have a burning passion for my fellow Jewish people. I want to go back and I want to help the wall problem. That's Nehemiah. So he inspects the walls at night. And then he begins the rebuilding process. And this is a little picture of how this works. Those of you who know how Jerusalem is set up, it's kind of interesting that later on Jerusalem is expanded out here on the west side, but the original hill from David up to the Temple Mount, Nehemiah is inspecting walls, and it looks like this narrow, like carrot that you would pull out of the ground, It's from the top on the north end where the Temple Mount is, down into the lower city of David, and he's going to construct a wall around that area. So here's the picture of the rebuilding. There's some opposition to that. And Ezra then, and it's all done, reads the Holy Scriptures to the crowd. And then after he gets back to Persia, he has permission and he comes back and he completes reforms. So that's the story of Ezra and Nehemiah. Pretty cool stories that go into the Scriptures. Why? Because God is preserving his nation that they thought might disappear, get absorbed in Babylon. But he works history out to replant them. This is how it happened. Ezra and Nehemiah. Are you there? Your Bibles? See what that looks like? We're going to, I believe, be ready to go on then to Esther. I might mention something interesting that the purpose for the book of Nehemiah in the Bible is not to teach Christian leadership. But it is a book where you can learn a lot about leadership qualities and capabilities for Christian men and women in the roles that you have in our world today. It's not the purpose of it. It's the purpose is to show how God is going to preserve his promise through that rebuilt nation and the walls that are going to protect it. But Nehemiah is quite a character, and there's lots to learn in that Bible book. Esther is a whole other ballgame. Are you ready for that? We don't know who the author of Esther is. And I think my little outline deal should be, I got my pages out here now, so do you have that in front of you or not?
60 is where I
Yeah,
started.
that's where it is. I'll pull it up over here. Oh, I got it over there. I knew it. I had pulled it out. So this is one of those where you scratch your head a little bit. So we don't know who wrote it, we don't know when, and we don't know where. But God saw fit, under the direction of the Spirit, to get it into that level that the Jews accepted this. This is a holy inspired word of God and needs to be in the Holy Bible. And then what in the world is this all about? Because it just seems like out of the blue. But this is pretty interesting to me, that in this whole business of it's really hand of God in history. It's like when you read, later on we're going to come across these prophets, and you read the story of Obadiah. It's just no chapters, it's a little tiny Bible book. Why did God put that in there? I'm the God of history, I'm still in control, and the enemies that the Jewish people had for many years, their cousins, the Edomites, I'm going to take care of them. I got this. Obadiah. Edom will be destroyed. The book of Nahum. Why is that in the Bible? Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. The 12 little books at the end of the Old Testament. Why is Nahum in there? It's God saying, you know, for a big part of the history, and you read this, by the way, friends, in your 1st and 2nd Kings Chronicles, of how Assyria came and wiped out the north. And then, like, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, and Tiglath-Pileser, you know, his generals, they're going to threaten the south. Oh, you stupid people who want to follow Hezekiah, give up! You know, that kind of thing. And then God wiped out 185,000 Assyrians. The Assyrians were a definite threat. I showed you a picture. Their territory stretched eventually from what we say as Iraq, down by the Persian Gulf, all the way up the Tigris-Euphrates, down the Fertile Crescent, down to the Holy Land into Egypt. So they were threatening. They were threatening. The book of Nahum is in the Bible where God says, I got this one too. Assyria is going to get wiped out. Don't worry. I'm God. I got this. It's pretty cool. Esther is like that. Because after the Assyrians have threatened, then come the Babylonians, who not only threatened but deported the people. Then come the Persians. Now, the Old Testament books, like, you know, they kind of end. And without the book of Esther, we would wonder, how did this nation survive? Persia. And the book of Esther is in there saying, I'm God, I got this one too. Because in the midst of all this, like, you're going to have returns, Jewish people coming back, like Ezra and Nehemiah, 458, 444. Shortly before that, the whole nation might have been totally wiped out. There was a plot going on revolving around the gross mindset of one really bad guy in the Persian Empire who convinced the Persian king, let's just let's be like Hitler and kill all Jews. I mean, that's how bad it was. And God works this out where the king of Persia had a beauty contest because he wasn't satisfied with his queen and he dumped her and he wants a new one. And a Jewish girl wins the contest and becomes the new queen. It's Esther. And she gets involved here because her relative is going to say to her, Esther, I found out there's this plot to kill all of us Jews, and you are one of them, but you're the queen. You got the king's ear. Sneak in there, convince him, tell him the plot, tell him what's going on. And the Jewish people survive. That's the story. But God put that in the Bible because without that historic event of Esther, there would be no Jewish people, there'd be no Jesus. They'd be wiped out. So God puts that in there so that we know, I got this too. There's still going to be a Savior. There's still going to be a Jesus coming. There is no Jesus mentioned. There's no promised Messiah mentioned in the book of Esther. But it's there for historic purposes. God's in control. I got this one. And I'll take care of it. Jews will survive. So that's the story. And what happens is way after the first return, but before the second and third return, is this Esther story right in there. And you can read, it's a short one. It's like 19 minutes. So I have a reading plan there, and I don't know if I had pictures of the Ezra story and Esther story in here. But you'll enjoy that one. And the turning of tables from a bad guy into... he did not like Esther's relative, Mordecai. Didn't like Mordecai because this bad guy who was high up in the administration wanted people to bow down to him. Mordecai wouldn't do it. Not going to do it. And Haman, the bad guy, says, I would really like to find a way that I could kill Mordecai. How about we build a gallows and hang him? But it's on those very gallows that Haman was hanged. Oh, God has known what he was doing here. He's taking care of it. Pretty cool. And the Jewish people, by the way, there was sort of a shake of the dice, pick the day, this is the day we're going to go kill Jewish people. All across the Persian Empire, the king says, no matter where you live, you got a Jewish neighbor, stab him. And you're thinking, why would I do that? Well, you get their Cadillac. you get their summer house, you get their stuff, you get their whatever they got. So it was going to happen until the tables were turned. And on that day, God said, and the king said, it's okay for Jewish people to defend themselves. If the neighbors are going to attack, you can fight back. And they did, and they survived as a people. Then some more under Ezra and under Nehemiah moved back to the Holy Land. But they survived. And that survival day is still to this day, among some observant Jews, their 4th of July, their Independence Day. Usually falls somewhere in February. It's their Purim, P-U-R-I-M, because that's the Hebrew word for throwing the dice, throwing the lots. So if you ever talk to some of your Jewish neighbors who are on the east side sometime and they talk about Purim, that's their Independence Day, and that started from the book of Esther. Pretty cool. Anything else? We made it. We're actually done a little bit early tonight. I'm impressing you, I know. But this is really exciting. We can watch the history and hand of God one more time these Wednesdays before we move into new literature. Thanks everybody for your time and attention. Our fun road maps. Drive safely home. And we'll see you in church. What's that? Oh, look, on the bottom. Okay, that's good. I got it. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see if we can get that. It was on the bottom, Jill, wasn't it?
Yeah, but last day.
Come on. I'm not used to using this notepad. Well, there's my Esther slides. How come that didn't come up?
Yeah, it's on the busy schedule.
I'm looking for it. There it is.